why.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is absolutely accurate, um, and it's really not. I mean, how to put this? So again, there's a lot of questions in what you asked. So let me see if I can pick a few of them apart. And hello, David. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm not sure. Do we have the reading on the?
Oh, I can put the reading up. Yep.
Yeah.
I can put the reading up. Give me just 1 second. I forgot.
Okay.
There's a lot of questions in what you asked. So let me see if I can pick a few of them apart. And sorry about that. I wasn't really just repeating myself. That was that was just a strange thing. All right. So we are in the book of Samuel. We're in chapter 17 of said book. Okay, good deal. All right, so I'm going to share the screen and we'll put it up here. All right, so oops. All right, so yes, so first of all, your first question, as I understood it, was is this advice he was looking for? And yes, I think the answer is the answer is yes, and I think it's implied in the sort of maybe even in the previous chapter, where remember we had that conversation about Ahithophel, right? Ahithophel is the one who says, "Go sleep with all your dad's concubines," right? So, you know, he's I don't know what, the chief of staff. He's the primary advisor, and so he is going to try to pursue a policy, right, that is going to be very beneficial for Avshalom, right? And as we said last time, right, his language is concise, it's clear, right? And what he wants to do, right, is go and dishearten all of David's guys, get them to run away, kill David, and boom, that's it, right? End of story. Game is over, and we move on to the next chapter, right?
Right.
But Avshalom now calls Hushai, right? Because Hushai has convinced Avshalom that he is loyal to him and no longer to David, right? And so the what's really interesting, right, is that Hushai's advice is completely different, right? It's a completely it's like it's almost off the wall, right? It's long, it goes on forever. He's he says that what Ahithophel said was not good, right? He says that he uses a lot of flowery language, right, talking about bears and whelps and so on and so forth, right? And so it's pretty clear to anyone except for Avshalom that he is I don't know, it's clear to us, right? This is that classic sort of biblical dramatic irony where we know that Hushai is on David's side, but no one in the room seems to know that, right? And so Avshalom, yes, takes that advice, right? And also very interesting, right? So here we have this little, these S's here, right? As I've said, right, those are little breaks in the text, right? So it seems to me that probably the story ended here, right? And Absalom and all the men of Israel said the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Achitophel, right? And then picked up again here, right? Then said Hushai and Zadok and Abiathar and so on and so forth, right? But at some point, someone inserted this phrase, right? For God had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Achitophel to the intent that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom, right? So there is this sort of, it might be sort of a later, shall we say, a later tradition, right? That all of a sudden we need to have God be involved in this, right? Because it couldn't just be the machinations of men that would have caused all of this. Right? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, but was it necessary to put that in? Wouldn't we have?
I mean, from a literary perspective, my sense is it would have been better if that weren't there, right? It kind of just muddies the water, right? On the other hand, as Alter points out, right, the fact that it's there doesn't, they didn't actually change the text, right? And say, and say something along the lines of like, Hushai was then endowed by God with a spirit of deception and God caused him to say this, right? That seems very sort of out of nowhere, right? So
Sorry, I'm late.
I'm sorry.
I said, I'm sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. No problem. No problem.
Okay.
All right. So we're just talking about Hushai and Achitophel, which is where we ended last time, right? So at that point, right?
Hi.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Are there any other examples of suicide in the Torah?
That is a great question. The only
I just read it was such a shock because I don't remember any.
Yeah, I don't,
So
it's really
it's-
interesting. That's a great question that I think it would be worth doing a Google search. After class, I'll try to do a Google search and see if I can, because the only one that I can think of is not in the Hebrew Bible. It's in the New Testament, and it's Judas.
yeah.
And I don't even know if that is in the New Testament or if that's a later tradition, that Judas commits suicide after after he betrays Jesus. But it's a great question. I don't know the answer. And it is such an affecting scene, as Dodie points out.
Really tremendous.
Right. And we'll get there in a second. I think it's really important,
Yeah.
right, to mention this. And and again, it sort of pushes at this notion, I think that, Betsy has talked about, right, about how much this book is so caught up in the politics, right? So caught up in the, it feels like, it could be an opera, where the king and the bishop,
Of course,
the king and the pope are arguing, and the stakes are, whoever wins their big argument is gets to stay alive, and the other one has to die in disgrace. It's really quite intense. All right, so I just want to point out, right, before we get to the issue of we'll do it in order, right, is that Hushai then makes this report to David's guys, right, and then but he says, right, therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, don't wait, right, go right away, waste no time because these guys might be on you. When we just learned, right, that the king that Avshalom had decided that he was going to follow Hushai's advice rather than Achitophel's. So Alter suggests, well, maybe he's afraid that Avshalom will change his mind. I'm not sure, but it is interesting, right, that he tells him to hurry up. Okay. And then there's this great scene, which is, if you have Alter's book, it's on page 300. If you don't, this is verses 17. Let me pull it up here. All right. Now, Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed by Enrogel, and a maidservant used to go and tell them. And they went and told King David, for they might not be seen to come into the city, right? They don't want to call attention to themselves. But a lad saw them and told Absalom. And they went both of them away quickly and came to the house of a man in Bahurim who had a well in his court, and they went down into the well. Can you imagine? It must have been so crazy to be in a well. And the woman, right? What woman? Where did this woman come from? I love all these women that just sort of like pop up out of nowhere. And so it must be the woman of the house, right? Spread the covering over the well's mouth and strewed groats thereon, and nothing was known, right? The guys were effectively hidden.
Was Absalom in the well?
No, Absalom was in the well. Absalom was in Jerusalem.
Who was in the well? Who was in the well?
Jonathan and Ahimaaz, who are agents of David.
Ah,
Okay.
Jonathan, Ahimaaz.
Yeah. Absalom's servants came to the woman in the house, and they said, "Where are Ahimaaz and Yonatan?" And the woman said to them, "They are gone over the brook of water." And when they had sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. So this, as Alter points out, right, this is a very clear echo of the story in the second chapter of Joshua, right, where Rahab the harlot saves the two agents of Joshua in the city of Jericho, right, and for saving them, they agree to keep her and her family safe, right, and eventually, even though she's a non-Israelite and she's a harlot, right, the tradition says that eventually Joshua made her his wife. Right? So this is another fast-thinking, noble woman who is able to, as Alter points this out later, she's able to prevent violence, right, through this. All right.
Do we assume that there's no water in the well?
Maybe they're right. There's no water in the well. Right. I don't know. I don't know if there's no water in the well or if they just.
That's like a Debbie.
That well must have been awfully shallow because they're usually very small, round, and very deep.
Right. Exactly. So I'm really trying to figure out this well, because like, get two guys into a well. What were they, like one on top of the other? And what did they hang on to? I mean, the practical questions sort of beg out for for some sort of logical answer. But again, this, I mean, I learned something. I took a fiction writing class.
I think it has another meaning.
Say again?
I said, I think it has another meaning.
Okay. Go ahead.
That the fact is that, I mean, that although they have to come in stealth, they have allies all over, and they're getting by. I mean, this is the beginning of the end of Absalom.
Mm-hmm. Right. Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Betsy. Go ahead, Ann.
Not all wells are as small and narrow as the ones we're familiar with here in the States either. So.
Oh, right. That's a good point. I mean, who knows? What I was going to say is I I'm not a very good fiction writer, but I took a class in college, and one thing I learned, right, is that if a thing happens in a story, the thing happens in the story. I mean, you can't just sort of say, well, it couldn't have happened because, well, in this story it did. So, I mean, you can say you don't like the story, but you can't say that it couldn't happen. So anyway, so it came to pass after they were departed that they came up out of the well and went and told King David, right? And very interesting, right? What does he say? Arise ye and pass quickly over the water, for thus hath Achitobel counseled against you, right? So Hushai is playing a trick, even on David, right? I mean, a trick that will help David, right? But still a trick, right? He knows that Absalom has taken has taken his advice, right? He's gonna go slow. Achitopel wanted things to move fast. Hushai said, no, slow it down. Pull together an army, so on and so forth. But Hushai is saying to David, this is what Achitopel counseled against you, so get a move on, right? Get yourself organized quickly, right? And you can sort of see the value of approaching the problem this way, right? It's not so much about he's coming, he's not coming, right? It's don't wait, right? Get moving. Get yourself organized for the confrontation that will inevitably happen, right? So David did arise, right? And they passed over the same word that we had again. We had a bunch of times last time, that vayavaru, right? If you can see where I'm circling this, right? And they passed over the Jordan, right? And they did it quickly, right? By the time the morning came around, there was no one there. Right, and now we get to the place, right? It's a single verse, right? That stopped Dodi and stopped Connie, right? When Achitopel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his ass and arose and got him home unto his city and set his house in order and strangled himself. And he died and was buried in the sepulcher of his father.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
there were 7 suicides I don't know if it's both Old and New Testament or just the Old, but if you Google it, there's a lot about it.
Wow. Interesting. Because
Thank you.
That's great. I can't think of a one. So I'm really glad to know that they're there. And I can go searching for them. It's a really, and the motivation, right, for this suicide, right?
But they don't even call it suicide in the Bible. It's called self-murder, phrases like that. But anyway, I have an iPad on my lap and I looked it up. And so it's very interesting for those of you that can look it up, okay?
We will. I'm definitely going to look it up.
Okay.
Alter calls it suicide, so that's why I'm using that word. But
Yeah.
I'm happy to be corrected if he's being anachronistic.
And Sonsino says he strangled himself.
Right.
That tells you exactly how he did it.
Exactly. But it's very interesting, right, that Alter suggests 2 motivations for this suicide, right? The first one would be, he's been publicly shamed,
Yeah.
right? And passed over in favor of Hushai. But Alter also suggests, right, that Achitopel is keen enough to recognize that he is at this point a dead duck, right?
Yeah.
That the fact that Avshalom has taken Hushai's counsel ensures, in fact, that David will defeat Avshalom, right? And then David will come back, and he will deal with Achitopel, right?
Yeah.
So better to put your house in order, right? And be buried in your father's grave, right? Rather than waiting around and being impaled on a post. So I don't know, but it's tough, right? It seems, it's one of those things that feels like such a waste of here's this obviously brilliant man. He's amoral, to be sure, right? But obviously brilliant. All right, so now we switch gears, right? And we have that David is now in Machanaim, right? And Amasa now has taken over the army for Absalom. Joab has gone off with David, right? So Amasa is now is in charge of the army. All right, and and they camped, right? They pitched tents, right? Vayichan Yisrael va'Avshalom Eretz Hagilad, right? So they're preparing a big siege on David. All right. And so here, very important little piece, right, is that when David shows up in Machanaim, right, all these guys, and the one that will come up later is Barzillai. We'll see Barzillai later, right, brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and meal and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse and honey and curd and sheep and cheese of kine for David and for the people that were with him to eat. For they said, the people is hungry and faint and thirsty in the wilderness, right? Very interesting that they here, right, are going to provide David. So this comes back to Betsy's point, right, is that David may be on the run, right? He may have been forced to revert to his old sort of outlaw days, but he has a lot of
Well, also there's a lot of different currents at the time. It sounds like this is turning a contingent moment in history, even though the Bible doesn't recognize contingency as part of what drives history.
Mm-hmm. So what do you say a little bit more about what you mean by contingency?
Contingency means that what the ultimate decision is made by the circumstance, that the current circumstances have a huge role to play in what happened.
Right.
That there was no determinant. It was completely open.
Right.
So that for moments, I mean, most things have power over them, and so they're not open to, but even them, I mean, life is contingent on things like the sun and the universe, which we don't understand, but I think they're saying that I'm putting too much in it, but that's what I see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting at something, right? Which this is what I think is remarkable here, right? Is that except for the little verse that Dodie pointed out, right? The events here are being driven by human decisions, right?
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting to me, right, that one of the things that saves David, right, is the loyalty of his subjects. Right? That's, and we see this again and again, right? That Hushai turns into a trickster in order to save David, right? And then the woman in Bahurim, right, saves David by tricking the pursuers of those two guys, right? And here we have
that's exactly what I meant.
right, and here we have Barzillai and these other guys who are basically turning into quartermasters and providing the troops with everything they need to live, not just food, but also beds and basins and vessels and all this stuff. I mean, like, it's a huge undertaking, right, to feed an army.
Huge underground at this point.
Exactly. He's back to being in his sort of outlaw mode. But he also, whether he's back to being able to engender the love of the people or just his, he still has that much sort of political capital
Right.
built up, one or the other. All right. So when we get to chapter 18, right, we see David, counts out, the number of guys he has. Presumably, the Israelite army is much larger than his group, right? And so he sends his guys out, and he has three different armies, right? Some led by Joab, some by Avishai, Joab's brother, and then Ittai the Gittite, right? And so, Joab and Avishai are these really bloodthirsty guys, right? They want to kill anything that moves. I'm not so sure about Ittai. right? And then this I love, right? I love this, right? And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. Right?
Mhm.
In Alter's language, right? I'm going to sally forth. And everyone's like, whoa, king, thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us, but thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou be ready to succor us out of the city. Right. So very interesting. David is kind of shunted to the side, right? He is not, he's essentially being told by his commanders,
Right.
he would be a problem, right? Because everyone's attention would be on him, right? And that's all they're looking for. So stay out of the way, basically. And so he stood by the gate side, right? And we see this again and again. Where does David position himself, right? And here, so he stands next to the gate, right? And they went out by their hundreds and thousands, right? And then very important line here, right? This sort of pathetic line that we get, and the sort of pathos of this story, right, is very much in David's sort of puzzling level of concern for the son who would kill him, right? And so the king Vaitsav Hamelech et Yoav et Abishai et Ittai lemor la'atli la'na'ar la'avshalom, right? Deal gently for my sake with the young man, with Avshalom, right? And everybody heard, right? He said it to Joab and Abishai and Ittai, right? He says this to his commanders, but everybody hears it, right? And so they go out, right? They go out to the fields, and there was a battle, right? In the forest of Ephraim, right? And as Alter points out, it's not uncommon in the Bible, right? When there's a battle, what does it say about the battle? There was a battle. It doesn't give much detail, right? And the people of Israel were smitten there before the servants of David, right? A great slaughter there of 20,000 men, right? So David's people numbered in the thousands, right? They went out by hundreds and thousands, which means that there were, probably no more than 10,000, and there were 20,000 casualties on the other side, right? And it said, right, that the forest devoured more people that day than the sword.
What do you think that means?
I'm sorry?
What do you think that means? Did they escape into the forest, or?
Yeah, that seems to be is that they ran into the forest and then found themselves and then died in the forest, either from exposure, or they got stuck like Avshalom did and sitting ducks for David's soldiers. It's not entirely clear.
Did they really die though?
Say it again.
Did they really die?
You can't really trust these numbers, so I don't know. I really don't know. Was it?
It sounds like they're trying to show that it was a lot.
Right. I mean, I think that's exactly. I mean, I think the actual numbers are less important than the fact that, as in the past, right, David not only has undying loyalty from his commanders, right? His commanders are also ruthless, and his people are very, very well trained. And so, you can put together a big army, but if they're not effective fighters, then they're not gonna win the battle.
And they might not be used to fighting in the forest.
Really, right?
Where there might be wild animals, sites which they're not familiar with at all.
Exactly.
The idea of the forest devoured them, isn't that powerful?
It's very powerful, right? Yeah. How do they say that? By Yerev haya'ar le'echol ba'am, right?
Yeah.
You know, the echol, right? In, you know, literally to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and Absalom chanced to meet the servants of David. Right, and so, and Alter translates that line, and Absalom chanced to be in front of David's servants. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But yeah, I mean literally before.
Mhm.
The Avshalom rochev al ha-pered vayavo ha-pered tachet shovech ha-ele ha-gdolah vayechezak rosho va-ele vayutan ben hashamayim uven haaretz. Such an evocative image, right? He was riding
Oh,
on a
boy.
mule, right? And his mule goes under the thick bough of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught hold of the terebinth, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth. Right? He's stuck in this kind of limbo, right? He's neither dead nor alive. He's neither in heaven nor is he on earth.
Well, it sort of also shows that he doesn't have the relationship to God that David had.
At all, right?
Right.
You're absolutely right, Betsy. I hadn't thought of that, but that's very clear, right? That Avshalom, you know, again, it's such an interesting question that Dodi asked at the beginning, right? What is the force of God's hand? And I think that the reason that I think this is so interesting, right, is that, you know, for me, at least from like an artistic perspective, it would feel more consistent if there weren't these sort of questions, explicit questions of explicit gestures at God having a role, right?
Right.
But one of the reasons that I think that it would be better, right, is because, as Betsy points out, here we have that, right? We don't need to ask that question. We don't need to have that explicitly in the text for us to ask that question, right? Because this image of being stuck between heaven and earth, right, as Betsy points out, right, suggests that Absalom does not have that relationship with God, right? Not so much that, you know, God is putting the thumb on the scales, but just but God's, you know, sort of lack of interest in Absalom means that he gets caught by his hair, right? Presumably it's his hair. I don't know, but
Yeah.
He had a mane of hair that was well known.
right. He talked about his hair all the time. So, all right. So, and the mule just kept on going, and so unlike Bilam's ass, right, who tries to protect Bilam from the angel of God, this mule doesn't even know what's going on. He's just, you know, he keeps on, excuse me one second. Yeah, he keeps on going, and yeah, it's crazy.
It's fun.
It's a kind of a crazy image. But it's also very, I actually think this is an example, right, of the way the Bible is, you know, gives these very strange details, but sometimes so little context. Like the question, why was Absalom in the forest in the first place?
Right.
How did he get there? Was he fleeing with the rest of the Israelite soldiers? Was he at the head of their columns, or was he, you know, behind, you know, like a commander? So I mean, but it's as though the text is encouraging us to speculate. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Well, somewhere it said he was ahead of them, but the one thing I liked about Alter here, he said Absalom was dangling between heaven and earth.
Yes, yeah, I love that.
It's quite a different picture. than taken up between heaven and earth.
It also, it's like one paragraph, such a powerful narration,
Yes,
all in one paragraph.
right. It's amazing, right? And so, I mean, I want to have this sort of notion, right, that he's in the forest because he's fleeing from
Right.
the army, right? And this is an example, right, of how the forest devoured the people,
No,
right? Because the terebinth kind of gobbles him up, right, and leaves him hanging there, and he's at the mercy of this guy, right? Ish echad, right? A certain man is how they translate it, right? We don't know who it is. It's a certain man. He's an angel, right? In the way of a lot of Bible stories, right? He's the guy that shows up and brings necessary information for the plot to move forward, right? So
What is a terebinth?
a terebinth is a kind of tree.
Oh, it's a kind of tree.
Yeah, and it's
Like a fir tree.
Is it- it's like an evergreen.
I was just
Yeah.
looking it up. It says a small southern European tree of the cashew family that was formerly a source of turpentine.
oh, so it was I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't either.
yeah. But
Well,
it's
that's
Oh, then it says what's a terebinth in the Bible?
okay.
Sometimes treated as oak. The word alon means oak. Considered in English is the oaks of Mamre anyway.
Yeah.
It's,
That word terebinth, or if it is an oak, it's associated with Abraham, right?
Yes.
That's where that's where he bought the burial plot. And if I'm not wrong, that was what he was sitting, under the terebinth tree when the angels of the Lord came to see him and to tell Sarah that Isaac was going to be born. And so, the terebinth generally has, so maybe it could be another sort of layer of irony, right? That the terebinth is associated with hospitality and peace, right? And here it is, it's an accessory to the defeat of Absalom. But it's great, right? That Ish Echad, right, sees it. He doesn't do anything himself, right? Because he heard what David said, but he went and told Yoav because he knows that Yoav is going to take care of business. Yoav does not beat around the bush, as we know, or beat around the terebinth.
right.
Can I ask you a question about that certain man?
Yeah,
Because he's not there just for our convenience to, he's saying to me, not important things, but meaningful things, that if it weren't, if you didn't strike him down, I would have to give you 10 pieces of
yeah.
1,000.
It's like the guy from today.
What does that mean? And a belt. I mean,
Well, I mean, think of it as
saying something.
think of it as a boxing purse, Dodie. A Kenyan boxer gets a pile of money, and he gets that belt, right? He gets like
Where's my cat?
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I didn't say anything.
But I think but you're right, Dodie. It's not just convenience, right? He's also there. He's there to show also the difference between Yoav and the vast majority of David's soldiers who are sensitive to David's worry about his son, right? Yoav as the ultimate what's the word I'm looking for? He's the ultimate practitioner of realpolitik, right? Understands that Avshalom cannot be brought back into the folds, right? There's only one. It's either Avshalom dies or David dies. It's one or the other, right? And David is laboring under this delusion, right, that somehow this situation can be resolved without one of them being killed. right? And so, so Yoav, the guy says to Yoav, yeah, I mean, you can give me, who cares about 10 pieces of silver? You can give me 1,000 pieces of silver. I'm still not going to kill Absalom because my life would be forfeit. I mean, the king would kill me. And so then Yoav says, well, I'm not gonna tarry. I'm not gonna hang around with you, foolish guy. So this very puzzling passage. David Alter has this whole argument about why Yoav sticks these three. The traditional translation is dart, but Alter's translation is sticks, and he puts them in the heart of Absalom, right? While he was still alive, in the heart of the terebinth, right? Very interesting use of language here. They don't capture it in the translation that's on the screen, but he says that he sticks them into the Lev Avshalom, Odeno Chai. He's still alive.
Incredibly cruel.
Right,
death.
very cruel, right? Right.
Really
There's a cruelty there, and if that's the only point, but then the 10 young men that bore Yoav's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. So obviously it was a little bit of torture there, but
right.
But there.
I did more than a little bit.
Yeah, some sort of
Yeah.
symbolism there.
I mean, they stuck him. He was like put on a grill alive.
Yeah, but not enough to kill him.
Hacked to pieces.
Yeah.
Not nice.
Right. And then Vayitka Yoav bashofar Vayashov ha'am mirdof acharei Yisrael ki chashach Yoav et ha'am. Right. So very powerful verse, right? That Yoav blew the horn, right? The shofar. He blows the shofar, right? And very often the shofar is is a sound at the beginning of the war, but here the shofar signals that that's it. We've done what we came to do. You don't need to kill anybody else, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then they bury Absalom. They don't even show David Absalom's body, right? They just bury him under the big heap of stone, right? And Absalom laments, right, that he doesn't have children. Right. Of course, earlier in the book, it said that he had 3 children, but and so Alter says that the traditional way to harmonize that is to say that his children died young before him, and then there's this very interesting piece, which I'm not entirely sure. Will there be repercussions about this later on? It's not really clear. So I'm not sure I entirely understand what it's doing here, but this whole story about, well, how are we going to tell David, right? How are we going to tell David? And we have 2 guys. We have one guy that's a very loyal servant of David, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, right? And he wants to run. He was the guy that jumped into the well, right, to save himself.
Right.
He wants to run and tell David the news, and Yoav is like, you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be the one that tells David that that Absalom is dead, right? And so he wants to send the Cushite, right? So the Cushite is African guy, right? Where there's less relationship, right, between David and the Cushite.
He can kill the Cushite.
Right. If David kills the Cushite, it's a loss that Yoav can handle, whereas he does seem to have some kind of emotional connection to Ahimaaz. But it is very interesting to see how, right, that here is David in verse 24. He's sitting between the 2 gates, right? The outer gate and the inner gate, the wall of the city will have, be sort of a double wall with a passage in between, right? And a lookout saw that there's someone coming, right? And then but they notice that there's two guys coming at different speeds. And so now we understand why Yoav didn't necessarily want to have Ahimaaz be the one, right? I think the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, and the king said he is a good man and comes with good tidings, right? He comes with ambiguous tidings, right? That the war has been won, right, at the cost of the death of Avshalom, right? And so what does he say? Ahimaaz says, all is well, right?
Yeah.
And it has a very sort of diplomatic answer. And then when the king asks him, well, what's up with Avshalom? Ahimaaz loses his nerve, right? And he said there was a great tumult, but I don't know what it was.
Oh,
Right? He punts. Can't entirely blame him, right? And then the Cushite comes along and says, tidings for my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee on this day, and all of them that rose up against thee. Right? And he said unto the Cushite, is it well with the young man Avshalom? Right? And the Cushite answered, the enemies of my lord the king and all that rise up against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. Right? So he is also clever, right? He's more blunt than Ahimaaz. He actually indicates, right, that Avshalom is dead, but he doesn't say, he's dead, right? And so it's a little bit, maybe not entirely clear, right, until we get to the next chapter, right, which begins with, and the king was very much moved, or as Alter translates it, right, and the king was shaken, right, he was shaken, right, and he goes up over the gate, right, he goes away from where he's going to be with his people, right, and he goes up and he weeps, right, he weeps and weeps and weeps, and all he can say is Beni. You can listen to it in Hebrew.
Beni.
Yeah, Beni Avshalom, Beni Avshalom, mi yitain muti ani tachtecha, Avshalom Beni, right?
Wow.
Beni. Oh,
Yeah,
so sad.
It's so sad. It's so
Oh.
sad, and it's such. And David is,
Oh.
and you can sort of see, right, how David is putting himself into, an increasingly untenable political situation
Right.
because of his, his I would say belated concern for Absalom, right? Whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, I don't have a strong sense, but I do have a sense
don't we have a sense from it that we are supposed to feel moved?
I'm sorry, say it again,
Feel
David?
moved by it, aren't we?
I'm sorry, David, I didn't understand what you said.
We're supposed to feel moved by this part of the story, I think, aren't we?
But the pathos is expressed with the repetition
Yes,
of the phrases.
yes.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's not real. And I agree with you, David. I think that we're supposed to be moved, but I think we're also supposed to sort of ponder, right? Where was David's deep concern about Absalom, before, when he wouldn't allow him to come back from exile, when
And didn't talk to him even though he was in Jerusalem.
right, exactly, and where was his concern for Tamar and Amnon, right, during that whole sordid situation, and so I think it sort of gets at, I think, the something of a human reality, right, that we don't always feel things in what we might later consider, or what external observers might consider appropriate timing, right? We feel things when we feel them. And so he has this tremendous feeling of loss, maybe not only about Absalom, maybe about all
Himself.
the kids, right?
Israel.
But it only somehow completely shatters him in this moment for whatever reason. But it's a very dangerous moment, right, for him to suddenly dissolve in this grief, right? Because his men have just won the Civil War, and he has to not be right now a grieving father. He has to be the king who's in charge, right? Who's going to take charge again. And so in its own sort of way, it reminds me a little bit of Joe Biden 4 years ago, right? Who was mourning his son, who died, and decided that he wasn't going to run for president, right? And what would have happened, right, if it had been candidate Biden rather than candidate Clinton in 2016, right? I mean, it's a completely unknowable thing, but you get that sort of sense of when someone's sort of public role and their private life suddenly become somehow they get in the way of one another. It doesn't happen infrequently, I would imagine.
When life becomes history, it
Right.
becomes a lot more complicated.
Exactly. So we will get to Job's reaction, right? To Joab's reaction. We'll get to that next time, right? Because we'll see here, right? Just very quickly, right? And it was told to Joab, behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. He's weeping and mourning for his enemy, right? It's also his son, but it's also his enemy, right? So the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day, the king grieveth for his son. And the people got them by stealth that day into the city, as people that are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle, right? I mean, it's as though they had lost, right? It's as though they had quailed and run away. And that's how David's reaction is affecting the people around him, right? So at the same time as we have this, strong emotional reaction to David's being shaken, right? We're moved ourselves, right? David, unfortunately for him, is not a private citizen, right? So his reaction has a major effect on all the people around him. All right, so we will pick up again with chapter 19 in a week, and I look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you.
What's our ending chapter next time? Rabbi,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let's read through chapter 22, and I think I'm not sure. They say that author says that the story itself kind of ends after chapter 20, and that chapters 21 through 24 are kind of epilogue. So let's read through chapter 22, and we'll see how far we get.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Yep.
thank you.